Ask the Podcast Coach for June 10th, 2017.
It's showtime. Let's get ready to podcast.
Yes, it is Saturday. It's time to rock and roll. It's time for Ask the Podcast Coach, where you get your podcast questions answered live. I am your host, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting.com, and joining me right over there is the one and only Jim Cullison from the averageguy.tv. Jim, how's it going, buddy?
Good morning, Dave. Happy Saturday morning to you. Struggling with a little bit of a cold this morning, so apologize for my vocal quality. It won't be great.
That's always fun. And some things we'll be talking about today. Oh, we might hit on the fact that Apple's going to start giving you stats, maybe just a little bit. I've got a power rant coming up about radio that's, you can lead a horse to water kind of thing. And Jim, you wanted to take me to task.
I do. I'm going to challenge you.
All right. He's going to challenge me. So we'll have I think this might lead to the cage match at Podcast Movement. We'll see. But what? Wouldn't
that be great if they had a cage there and you could just take on podcasters? That would be awesome.
That'd be fun. And I should say thank you to Darren Dake. I'm wearing my Corner Talk t-shirt. So he's got his logo on the back, all sorts of fun stuff.
Podcast t-shirts, they can get you some mileage. I mean, they're not always a bad way to go. It's
always fun when you get that email. What's your address and what's your size? And it's like, oh, I've got a t-shirt coming towards me. Yay. So, and it's always fun watching the U.S. Postal Service cram t-shirts into, P.O. boxes that are the size of your fist. It's like you're pulling out this giant wrinkle. So
just put your foot up there trying to pull it out. Hey, I booked my flight for Podcast Movement. Speaking of Podcast Movement, that's all set. So yeah, excited about being down there. I'm going to try and get down there on Monday night. So I'll be around. We should do some meetups on Tuesday. We should maybe do an official Ask the Podcast Coach meetup of some kind.
Yeah, I'm there
Tuesday or something.
When does it start?
Well, officially it's Wednesday. It's Wednesday, Thursday, and half of Friday.
Okay, so yeah,
but Tuesdays there's some things going on Tuesday, but that'd be the day if you're going to get there early. That'd be the day to do meetups and meet people and that kind of stuff.
Because I know I always get in the day before.
Yeah,
that way I can set up booths and things of that nature. So,
well, I'm flying in Saturday. My son is a Marine and he's stationed at Camp Pendleton, and so I'm going to fly into San Diego on Saturday morning and hang out with him. We may do Disneyland. Why wouldn't you, right? On Sunday, just kind of hang around, do that. Then I'm going to go into our office on Monday, which is pretty cool. We have an office there in Irvine, so hang out with those guys for the day. Then Tuesday would be open. So I'm going to lobby for Dave, maybe a Tuesday afternoon, evening, Ask the Podcast Coach meetup, where we just get our listeners, together. Why not?
Hang out, eat some cereal together. It'd be great fun.
Yeah, be tons of fun.
So what is your what's in your craw?
Well, I was listening to your your school podcast show, and your interview with Alex tanked because your voice recorder bit it right in the process. Right? Didn't you say that?
Well, what happened was I switched microphones mid Skype call. That for whatever reason blew up my free Skype recorder to where it didn't record anybody. Like zero. Like I got the beginning on both ends, but the minute I changed things up. Now the problem with my recorder was I hit stop, and then when I hit record again, I did not notice that it said SD card full.
And I just hear more and more podcasters as they talk about when they have these problems. It's that damn voice recorder that messes up on them a lot. And I know other things go wrong as well. But you know me, I am not a fan of recording to that additional piece of hardware because it seems to me, it appears to me as I listen to podcasters, that thing causes more problems than it's worth. And I get a little concerned. I know we recommend that all the time. It appears to me we recommend that all the time. And I'm not a big fan of even having that I don't use a voice recorder anywhere in my setup at all at any time. And I just have very few failures with my recordings. And I wonder if that's not the best advice to have a voice recorder in your process.
You've never lost a recorder ever?
I lose very few. I mean, I maybe in the 600 or 700 that I've done, maybe less than 5.
Yeah, I think in like the first 3 years I was podcasting, I lost probably 2 or 3. And that's when I remember whenever it was either the second or the third one, I was like, that's it. I've got to get a backup going. And I don't think I've lost anything since then until Alex. So it's been 10 years since I've lost anything. And that really wasn't the recorder's fault. That was because the idiot guy recording it just goes, oh, it's a 32 gig card. It'll never fill up. Well, it does eventually if you don't, especially when you're recording in a WAV format.
Well, but we've had some issues where it's played too loud in there, or it's been like it record, it's overmodulated, or it does some weird things like that. I don't know. You can't see the levels very well, and I don't know. It just doesn't seem like great advice to me.
Well, it's like a guitar.
Come on, get mad at me, Dave. Get mad. Come on, I want you to.
No, it's
trying to develop good radio here.
Well, what it is, again, in this case, like even today, I rearranged my office. I have I got a new standing desk, which is great fun, but my office is a disaster right now. There's, I got everything plugged back in because I had to unplug everything to take the computer out and everything else. So like right now, well, here, let me just show you. This is where my recorder is. Okay. It's sitting on my desk. Let me get my hand out of the way. And so I'm reading it sideways. And so you can see the lights are blinking, but the one channel is already a little louder than the other. It's not really good. It should be coming up. So I could sit here and try to adjust this as we record it, but I'm looking at it upside down. And that's just because I got up at 8 o'clock. I went and got my McDonald's, came back, started looking at things, watched the Apple stats thing, took notes, started looking for questions in Facebook groups. And then at 10 o'clock started to get ready for the show and just basically ran out of time. We're not on Mixler today. There are all sorts of things. So it's called bad time management on Dave Jackson's part. So, where normally, usually I don't change things much, so we don't run into too many issues, but, I don't recommend if somebody in, here, I had somebody today, ask a question about, do I need a mixer and things like that. And the thing that I don't always agree with, if somebody just needs a recorder for a backup, I do not recommend the Zoom H6. That's overkill. I don't recommend the Zoom H5. If all you want is a backup recorder, go with a Zoom H1. It's $99. I'm using a Zoom H5 because I occasionally will take this out and do recordings with it, which actually you can record with a Zoom H1. It's not going to sound as good as if you had 2 microphones plugged into a Zoom H5, but if you just want to do some field recording every now and then, a Zoom H1 will be great. So yeah, I think it's like anything else. You have to know your equipment and have it set up in time.
I was just really disappointed that we missed that interview with Alex.
So did I really liked it. And in fact, the thing that killed me is I went over, the minute I was done, I went to my backup recording because I saw with the SD, I go to hit stop and it's like, oh, this wasn't recording. And I was like, all right, I got a backup. I got my Skype recorder, went over, went to the file and hit play. And I hear, are you there? Uh-oh. No. I'm like, okay, cool. It recorded. We're good. I don't have to call him back. We're good to go. I checked the minute we were done because it was a good conversation. And it wasn't until later I got that backup file. I opened it up and there's WAV file and then 40 minutes of nothing. And I'm like, oh, you got to be kidding me. Because I knew I didn't have it. That was the backup. And I was like, and so my thing there would be, if you're interviewing a podcaster, have them recorded on their end too. Even if you've got 2 things going, the more recordings, the better, because you never know. And the software I use as my backup is called it's called MP3 Skype Recorder. If that bad boy ever, because I noticed this when I went in and dug deeper, it had popped an error code somewhere. And because I had rebooted my computer before that interview, it had missed like a month's worth of stuff. Well, because it was my backup, I never noticed it. But it hadn't been recording Skype calls for about a month because I saw it pop an error once. And I'm like, I wonder what that's about. Click on OK, whatever, deal with it later. And it wasn't recording anything. So luckily I'd rebooted. So it started to record. And then when I switched microphones, which is still to me kind of like, we heard it on Skype. You're recording Skype. Why didn't you? So
it's frustrating. It was disappointing. I had waited. I was, for 2 weeks.
And my favorite
this was coming.
It's like when you hear a sports guy go, it's not about the money. And then they talk about money and you're kind of like, wait, it sure sounds like it's about money. And my favorite line was, he says, well, I don't want to like backpedal. And then he kind of backpedaled. And I was like, oh, brilliant. So
well, it's been a fun thing to watch from the outside, because I think there's a lot of lessons as podcasters to learn from what you guys went through. And you were very open about it. And Dave, I told you last week, I think it takes a lot of courage to do what you did. Most people bail. They're like, screw it. I don't want to talk to him. I've said some things. I'm embarrassed, whatever. And you just hit the nail right on the head and went right for it. And that, to me, that's impressive. I just don't think, I don't think a lot of people have the intestinal fortitude to be able to pull that off. So I was anxiously awaiting that.
Well, so was I. I was like, I can't wait to bring this to you guys. And the minute I said, I was reading the stuff and I said, and here's where I had a couple of caps. And he goes, caps. And I'm like, really? And he goes, oh yeah. And I was like, really? I was like, okay. So that's when I was like, it was the cap thing that set him up. Because I was trying to be, I already said I was kind of passive aggressive on some of that stuff, but yeah,
well, it's easy to be. It's easy to be in those situations, right? And I think it's easy to misread I think a lesson in this, and I think as hosts or as podcasters, what we need to be careful of is it's easy to misread our readers' comments. And I do this. This is part of my job at Gallup, and it's easy to misread those comments. And so if I read them once and I get a little flustered, I back away, come back to the comment and read it again slowly and make sure I'm not reading anything into, because you ever done that, or you read somebody's comments and you start reading it in your own head and you're changing the words as you're reading it, because you got to read it word for word. You can't read into it. You have to be very literal with it. And it makes you mad sometimes, and you have to back away from it and not respond right away.
Oh yeah.
It's just a good lesson for us podcasters.
Yeah, I used to teach classes in email, which sounds weird, but back in the day, and that was one of the things is do not send email when you're really, really mad, because you will say things that you will then later go, probably should have hold it off, should have waited 24 hours on that kind of thing, because you can, boy, when you're I did that once. I got me fired from a band once. The bass player sent this thing, and he sent something, and then he carbon copied the world. And I'm like, dude, you just gave my email address to the world. What are you doing? And I just ripped him a new one. And that was the end of me and that.
That was it. Dave's gone.
And this guy's an idiot and blah, blah, blah. He's a hothead. And I was like, I've lost 2 email addresses to people doing that.
Yeah. Hey, we're probably burying the lead, Dave. We should probably be talking about this Apple announcement.
Yeah, there's this was announced, and I will throw this in the chat room. I was really, really happy. It's interesting that when you go to listen on Apple's site, you have to stream in Safari. Well, right now my Mac is not even plugged in. So I'm like, there's got to be a way. So I pull up my iPad, I start watching it, and I had to watch, and this is hard to say, I had to watch at 1x. And I was like, I can't take it. I can't take 1x. So I was like, please be on YouTube. And it took me a while, but I found it on YouTube so I could watch it 2x. And this is a really weird thing to say. On one hand, it's exciting because Apple is going to show you how far people listen. And I think it's going to show how many subscribers. There's a whole new update to the Apple podcast app. They're going to have, there's these new tags where you can have, this is a series. Like it said, do not put the name of your show. Do not put episode numbers in your title. Do not just get that all out of there. Put the title of your episode in the title. And then everything else you can put in the tags. Now, I'm not sure how you would do this in I'm not sure where you put extra tags in PowerPress. But in Libsyn, you can go into the episode, go into the additional options at the bottom or advanced options, and you can add these tags. Now, be very, very careful, because now we're talking about putting in code. And when you put in code wrong, your feed goes. So, but you could say this is series 1, episode 1, blah, blah, blah. So that's kind of interesting. But the fact that we're going to be able to see how long people are listening, number one, I'm going to echo Todd Cochran's saying, be careful what you wish for. Because you may find out now that you just recorded an hour-long podcast and 60% of your audience is kicking out about minute 7 because you're talking about French toast.
Yeah. You may realize, your number, whatever that number is going to be significantly less because people are only listening to a minute or two, or if at all, right? I mean, it just because it downloads doesn't mean they haven't abandoned it for the most part in their feed. And so, I know your concern, and it's all of our concerns, is that people begin to obsess over the stats and waste time obsessing, and when they could be creating great content. And so I think there's that. I do think these new tags, these new types that they're putting out there, this new channel tag, there's an item, there's an episode, a season.
Yeah.
They're revamping the title. They want to get an item in there. Those are really cool. I mean, this is really cool. This is like Netflix, or this is like, this is style. We now are getting functional when we think about, especially these seasons that are in order. When I watch Man in the High Castle, I don't want to watch it from 10 to 1, which is the way it would show up in a podcast. I want to watch it from 1 to 10. I think that's great.
Yeah. They have a thing where it can be you can say this is a trailer. So if you're getting ready to launch your podcast, you could say this is a trailer for, season 1 or 2. You can actually have bonus content. That I thought was rather interesting. So I'm not sure exactly what that's going to be, or it could just be good old regular content. But they go over it and they show the things like that. Daniel says the regular title can still contain episodes. It's only the iTunes title tag that shouldn't have those numbers and codes. Okay. So that's what I'm looking for. I haven't gone over yet. I just found out about this morning. I had a little bird in my ear from Libsyn that said this, but they didn't give any links to like what the heck they're talking about. And the stats, we should say, is not tags, from what I understand, are live now, from what I saw of that last recording. So I need to go over, and I'm sure there's partners.apple.something, help section that will show you exactly what the tags are and what they do. And this whole thing about statistics. And the cool thing that I like about this, it's going to be in Podcast Connect. That's the other thing that I was like, oh, no. I've been telling people stay away from Podcast Connect because they love to go in there and change their feed and strand their audience. And now people are going to be in there and they're going to be asking you about the mirror URL. And I was like, that was the other thing. I was like, oh, we're driving people to Podcast Connect, because there are times when people shoot themselves in the foot. You can go in there and change your, let me think about this a second. If you change it to a URL that doesn't exist, because I've seen people do that. And I'm trying to remember if they did that in Podcast Connect or if they did that with a 301. I've seen people do that. They'll do a 301 redirect and direct it to, they'll have a typo and they'll direct it to a website that they don't own. And then at that point,
right,
you're screwed. So I don't know. It should be fun. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm excited about it. I think in the long run, it's a great thing. Number one, all the haters of Apple that I don't know. I didn't see in the screenshot if it showed you how many subscribers you have. I know that is a stat that's available. I don't know if that's going to be, I would assume if they're going to give you the rest of this stuff, why not give it to everybody? My other thing that I'm really surprised about that they didn't mention is that this is apparently free. And I'm like, okay. Because I'm like, if I was Apple, I'd be like charging for that. But I guess on the other hand, I don't know. It's just one of those things that it'll be interesting to see.
No, I think it's good. I think it is it's an admission that the podcast community is here to stay and that they're going to make an investment in it. There's they've made a significant investment to the database alone to get those new fields in there set up for us. I guess one of the questions I have is going back. Okay, so I have 300 episodes. And now what? Do I have to go back? Because in some cases, I've embedded seasons, and in some case, I've embedded just episodes, and I have episode numbers. And as a podcaster, am I going to have to go back and change things, or do I want to? I probably don't have to.
No, I don't think it.
Do I want to? And if I've created some things that was based on a season, do I want to go back and retag those? I think maybe I do. I think I maybe want to go back and take advantage where it's seasonal or it's episodic. No, what's the other term that they're using when it's
serial?
Serial. Yeah, whether it's serial or episodic, do I want to change? Do I want to change those to take advantage of those new, the new structures? If that was 2 years ago, I think that's a good question. Are we going to go back? And that could be a lot of work.
Yeah, Emily has a question. She says, "What are the hosts who submit people's shows to iTunes? And how will those customers be affected? I saw a few people talk about this, so I was just wondering. That is something I don't do anymore. I used to. I have control of a few people's feeds, and I've always sent them a thing that said, if you need me to ever change this, I will do this for you. But anymore, I just tell people, if you want me to submit your show to iTunes, give me your iTunes login name and password. Because either way, you have to trust me a whole bunch. And I would rather have you have complete control over. I do not want to control your feed at all in any way. In the early days of me doing this, I would just like, oh yeah, I'll just submit it for you, not knowing that was a bad thing. We're talking early days. So yeah, I don't know. That's a good question. But we'll see. I would just advise anybody to don't do that. Don't let somebody else control your feed. You should have that control under iTunes. Should be interesting to see. The other thing I thought was interesting, they said in that presentation, and somebody helped me do the math this morning. Apple said they have 400,000 podcasts now in their directory. And they talked about how last year they had 10 billion downloads. And they said 20% growth looking at 2017. And I was like, it's interesting because I was like, well, 20% growth, wait a minute. Because then I went over to the Edison Research and they're only showing the last couple of years 3 to 4% growth. And I'm like, wait a minute, if the listeners are only doing 3 to 4%, but podcasts are growing by 20%, maybe that's why we have a discoverability problem, because the listeners aren't growing as fast as the episodes are. And then Ryan Gray said, wait a minute, but the Edison Research says that most people listen to 5 podcasts. So if you take 4%, multiply it by 5 podcasts, there's your 20% growth. I'm like, oh, there you go. Fun with math. But I just thought the 20% growth, I was like, man, that's a sizable chunk.
Yeah, I think they're seeing some opportunity there. And, Apple just doesn't move on things just because they feel like it. And they don't, they won't waste time if they didn't feel like this was a viable market. And I think they're getting more than, because, they control 60% of the market, let's just say. That's just a big round number. I am sure those podcasts that they mentioned early in the keynote of NPR and, I'm sure there's some discussion at the higher levels about how do you help us help you. And so those bigger podcasts, I'm sure, are saying, guys, we need to do a better job, especially with some of the NPR stuff that is more, that is more serial in that's a little pun there, but in nature. I think so. The big boys, I think, are putting a little bit of pressure on them to say, hey, can we get a little more functionality, more like we see in an Amazon, movie player or in a Netflix or whatever. And so that's going to help us if we're going to take advantage of that. So it's exciting, I think, to see they care again. I mean, remember the years when we thought, like, are they ever going to do an update and ever care again?
They said the podcast app was the biggest update since it launched. So they've really, done a number on making it easy to listen and show these new serial items and things like that. Daniel J. Lewis from the Audacity to Podcast says the new tags are optional or fallback, so you don't have to retroactively update your episodes. But he does the Once Upon a Time podcast. He says, I'll definitely be putting in the new seasons tags. So yeah, that's and it'll be interesting. I know Emily asked, this is going to be supported by Libsyn? Yeah, I'm assuming now. Right now, like I said, we always have the extra RSS tags on the episode and in the podcast that you can always add. I'm assuming eventually these will be some sort of drop down or something like that. So I'm sure I can hear Greg pounding on his keyboard right now, trying to code that in. So I'm looking forward to Monday's service meeting. We do a thing online and I'll be like, okay, so how long till that's in the back end? So
one of the interesting things they talked about is a GUID, which typically you hide those. Those are never, for most people who use a GUID for their customers' data or whatever, you really never release that. You don't really show it. It's usually an ugly number of some kind, and you just don't show it. I got the feeling it's going to show up in that Podcast Connect, and you can change it, because they were like, we're asking you never to change this. And I thought, well, it's a unique identifier. Why would you give them access for either developers or the end user or podcasters to change it? So that seemed a little like Why are you that wouldn't be a good, just block that thing. If it's a unique identifier, don't let anybody change it. Leave it the same. So
because they said if you changed it, you could lose your status in the charts. And that's when I was like, oh, and they showed where there are charts still. We were kind of hoping that maybe New and Noteworthy went away, but apparently there are still charts and things like that. Daniel mentions that, sure, I should have mentioned this. Angelo will definitely be pounding away for PowerPress. And
they'll have to update it because it's fall, right? This is when they're anticipating this coming out.
He says that the documentation, and I'll have a link out in the show notes to a PDF, is merely pointing out the fact that we already knew that we shouldn't change it.
Yeah.
The GUID, which to me sounds like something out of Harry Potter or Lord of the Rings.
Mm-hmm.
We have to go over the river past the GUIDs.
Those are the priests in Ireland, right?
Yeah.
They're the GUIDs.
And then Craig says, call me cynical, but you think Apple are investing in this to monetize podcasts somehow further down the road? I was interesting because there's a part in that presentation where they say you can make money from a podcast by doing this. And they mentioned signing up for Apple's affiliate program and blah, blah, blah. And I was waiting for, you can now accept Apple Pay as a donation button. And I was like, oh, that would be cool. And nothing. They just kind of went over this makeshift people that were doing a podcast and planning it and things like that. So it was interesting, but I was kind of like, oh, here we go. What's, and then it was like nothing. I was like,
yeah, why wouldn't they? That wouldn't be a bad, much like we do with Patreon. What if they had their own Patreon system and they kept 30% of it? Right? I mean, that would be the Apple model, right?
400,000 podcasts.
Dave, would you give up, as a podcaster, would you give up 30% of your donation to Apple if it got you access to 60% of the listening market?
Yeah, in a heartbeat. I mean, it would hurt. Don't get me wrong. I mean, when I see, Patreon takes 10%, but it's one of the sayings. Do you want 90% of 100 people, or do you want, 70% of 1,000 people?
Yeah, especially if in the app it was really easy to do. That's one of the things with reviews and stuff. Some people find it hard to get that just because you there's so many hoops you got to jump through. If they made that easy, and it would be in their best interest to make it easy, and they kept 30, would we revolt over that? I don't know. It's a good question.
Oh, we'd be upset. We'd be like, this is more than anybody else. But please hit the app button and please hit the donate button in the app thing. This is ridiculous. Yeah, I could see that. It'd be great fun. I know in our chat room, somebody says, Apple is interested in money. Say it ain't so.
Yeah, that's what's made them so popular. Right? So
that's what they
get the billions they have in the bank.
Yeah, so it's going to be fun to watch. I'll be interested. And I'm not sure, they just said later this year, I think was how they put it. So, or end of the year or something like that. So
I think they are thinking they can monetize this in some way. Like again, they don't just do this out of the goodness of their heart. This is not,
because I'm like, you've got to pay somebody now. That podcast support at apple.com is going to have a couple more people on there to go, I just released an episode and I don't see any listening stats in my my stuff. So you got to pay those guys. You got to build that staff. That's going to cost money. And granted, I know this is a company that has $80 billion sitting in their couch cushion, but nonetheless, you don't get that big by just burning your money. So I'll be interested I would not be surprised if somewhere down the road they find a way to monetize this. And the other thing that this is doing is, because people are going to now be like so obsessed over their stats, people are going to go, no, I want you to listen in the podcast app so I can see where you're listening. They're going to be promoting, I would think, where to me, I'm just like, subscribe however you want, Overcast. I can see people now. I've seen people do this where they will give you a podcast, link, and that's it. No Stitcher, no nothing. Like you're listening to, and I'm like, I've always like, that's a bad idea. There are a lot of people with Android phones, but I can see people inadvertently, maybe not a great idea, driving everyone to the podcast app. I don't know.
Yeah, well, Daniel says that's what he's saying in the chat room right now. They're seeing it quite possibly as a feature improvement as part of iOS 11, and sometimes they do improve those things, make the experience better, something they can sell. But if you're going to put that kind of investment in it, hopefully for us, they put some dollars into marketing for it. So they say, so at the at the sales level where people are buying phones, they're saying, and it comes new and improved podcast app. So hopefully we'll get some run from it and pick up some new folks who haven't used the podcast app before in the process. It could be a loss leader. I mean, that's very possible that they know they're going to lose money on this to bring in some additional functionality. That's very possible as well. So they may not monetize it.
It should be fun to watch. No matter 2017 for the rest of the year will now be fun to go. Okay, we're getting closer to the end of the year, whatever that means. So, but speaking of money, we should take 2 seconds to say thank you to Josh Rivers from the Podcaster Survival Guide. You can find him at tpsguide.org. Of course, my buddy Glenn Hebert from Horse Radio Network. You can find him at horseradionetwork.com. And Josh Rivers from Development by JR. You can find that at devbyjr.com. And if you'd like to be an awesome supporter, just go over to askthepodcastcoach.com/awesome. And I did find this out thanks to Emily from thestorybehindpodcast.com. And that is, if you put a YouTube video, which makes sense when you think about this, if you are doing any kind of Patreon only stuff and you're putting YouTube videos, that doesn't do much for the RSS feed of your show, because it doesn't, I don't know if it shows up at all as a text link that you can then click and watch the YouTube video. But she noticed that I used to upload the post show as audio, and that works with it. And if I have the RSS enabled, so you can subscribe to the post show if you're an awesome supporter, and you can have that download. But I started just putting the video, because sometimes we'll do stuff that's very visual, and I'll just upload the video on YouTube and then put it into Patreon, and then it's unlisted on YouTube. And apparently that doesn't do much for an RSS feed, which kind of is a statement when I think about it. So I'll have to send out a poll to my Patreon people to go, would you like an audio or video version of the post show?
Yeah, that's probably a good idea. I should probably figure that out, because I'm doing that too. Our pre and post show on Home Gadget Geeks is now available to patrons, and I'm just getting a single digit number of views on that thing for my, now I have 14 or 15, patrons, so it's not like it's a huge number anyways. But maybe if I make that audio and make that subscribable, that would, I'd get more of them, because honestly, people are not sitting down and watching a YouTube video for an hour. They're just not, they're not doing that, Dave. That's not how they're consuming us, right? Yeah. They're not doing it that way. And then the post show is a half an hour, and they're probably not doing that either. In most cases, they want to listen to it as they listen to the rest of their podcasts, which is in their car or on the train, right? Yeah, exactly. that makes sense.
That's me. I was like, Dave, maybe you might want to think this through. And then maybe in the future, what I'll do is, unless it's only something very visual, I'll just put it out as audio.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. That makes a lot of sense.
And go that route. Well, is it time for me to?
I think it's time to pop a cork.
That's it.
Dave pops a cork in 5, 4, 3, 2.
I had a guy this week that it's always interesting. Number one, I don't want to go there. It's hard. It's there's I got something easy
now.
But he called up, want to ask me a quick question, which I need to find a polite way to say, that's called consulting, folks. But nonetheless, and he was explaining how he wanted to start this show, and he's currently spending, and he's going to get a deal, because I've heard people spending $500 an episode. He was going to get $100 an episode to go do a radio show, like on the actual, and I'm assuming this is AM radio, who knows what time, Saturday morning, whatever.
9:30 in the Central Time Zone.
Yeah. And it's probably, welcome to Matt the Money Man, whatever. And I'm like, okay. He goes, is that a good idea? And I go, well, here's the deal. I said, so that's $400 a month. I go, for $300, a one-time fee, you could start a podcast. And then for about $30 a month, you could reach not just only your signal, because you're only as strong as that signal, unless you're on iHeartRadio or something like that. But let's say he's not. You're only strong as your signal. And you reach the world. And with radio, you have to be listening at 3 p.m. on Saturdays or whatever time it is. And if you miss it, you missed it. Oh, and by the way, you have to go sell your advert. If you want, you can sell advertising on your show to help pay for your radio thing. And I go, so let's just Ben Franklin it. Podcasting, $300 to get started, maybe less depending on what you're doing. If you want to sell ads, all that money goes to you. It goes to you. You reach a global audience, and people can listen whenever you want. I said, I have my first episode from 12 years ago. You can still listen to that. I said, so that's podcasting. With radio, it's $100 a week. You're only as strong as your signal. And any ads that you sell go to pay for that $100 an hour. And there's no time shiftedness to it. And that's it. And he was still stuck on radio. He was still like, yeah, but with the radio thing, they said that eventually, if I got enough ads, I would keep the money after the, and I'm like, okay, well, and it was just one of those where this is a person that really wants to be on the radio. But
why not do both?
Well, that's what I told him. I said, well, you could do both. I said, you could,
I mean, it's expensive, obviously. Yeah.
I said, if you got the budget for it, by all means, I said, take that recording from the assumed good quality in the radio station, take that and put it out as a podcast. I said, if that's what you could do, I said, I'm just letting you know, you can save yourself $400 a month. And it was like,
yeah, people get things locked in their head, and they're like, I can't think. The radio, people ask me this question all the time. Did you grow up thinking you would, want to be on radio? Because this is what when the average guy hears podcasts, they think of them just as radio, right? For the most part. And I always tell them, yeah, but radio pay was terrible. There's a very few people they're like musicians. There's very few people making livable money, and there's a handful that are just filthy rich, but you have a better chance of being struck by lightning. So I never thought I'd do a radio career, but there is a draw, Dave, for some to be on the airwaves, to be in a radio studio, to say I have a radio show. And I think in some cases, like we have a computer store here in Omaha that puts on a Saturday morning, tech show, and I'm sure they're paying to do this, right? I mean, it's a big, long paid advertisement is what it is. But for them, it makes perfect sense in their niche to do that locally. And that's where a local radio can be really, really, really valuable. It's still reaching, some of the bigger stations, KFAB here in Omaha, they still have a pretty good reach. And by the way, their demographic, which are older people who don't know how to work on their computers, maybe not a bad market. So I think there's some cases where it makes sense. I'm with you. And I think you just said this a second ago. If you can do both and you can afford both, or you can figure out a way to do both, I think both are great. And you do it once and you can make two things out of it, right? You can push that down a feed and have it that way. So that'd be my preference.
Yeah. The other question that he had, and this is one of those, it's like, it depends, is he has a product, but he doesn't have a website yet. So he was like, well, do I start the podcast or do I put the website up? And I said, can you do both? I said, because what I would do is start a podcast, and he's kind of got a business. I said, so take all the frequently asked questions that you get at your job and use that as an episode. So for us, it would be, what's your favorite microphone? ATR 2100, blah, blah, blah. That would be episode 1. And I said, and while you're growing this audience, start building your website with your product on it, so that when you do get an audience, you've already got their they like you, they trust you, et cetera, et cetera. And then when you say, oh, by the way, I've got this new product, and I said, you might even get some feedback on it while you're building it. I have this product, I'm getting ready to launch it, yada, yada, yada. You might have somebody go, oh, that's really cool. Does it do yada, yada, yada? And you're like, I never thought of that. Maybe I should incorporate that into the product. And so it was one of those where it's like, I could see where, and that it doesn't make any sense to do a podcast until you have a product. I could see somebody saying that, and I could say, okay. And on the other hand, I could say, well, if you don't have an audience yet, though, why have a product? Because you can't sell to nobody. So I was like, if you can do both, do both. But that's a dangerous slope, because then neither one launches because you're working on both. So I wasn't sure if you had any opinion on, if the goal is to sell something, which one would you do first?
Well, I would do the one that was easiest to do first and just get it going, right? The journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step. And so you just got to take that step and get going. If you create the podcast first, you don't have a website. By the way, you can repurpose all that content that you did on audio, and because it didn't hit the site or hit an RSS feed doesn't mean you can't use it again. We've been at Gallup. We have been, we started a blog, back in 2012. And then, you don't have, when you start a podcast, you don't have an audience at first, right? So some of those blogs in 2012 and 2013 didn't get very many views. And for whatever reason, they're hard to dig up, and you definitely don't want to repurpose them inside the same blog just by copy and pasting, right? You would have to do rewrites, and we're not necessarily that interested right now in doing big rewrites, but we did start copying them and moving them over and changing the content a little bit, but we've been moving them over to Medium and repurposing them. So for some of those that didn't get a lot of views, and they're picking up hundreds of views now, and we're actually using them to help reestablish or establish this Medium channel. Well, the same thing on the podcast stuff, right? Just some of the early stuff you did, if it's good, pull chunks of it out and reuse it again a year later. So even though the audience is small, hey, it's okay. The content's still good. Use it again. So Dave, I would say if it's easier just to start a podcast, but you don't necessarily have a site for the sport, it's okay. Create content and then use it again, someplace later, or get your website going. And once you get your website up and running, switch over and make your podcast work. So whatever's easiest, I think, is whatever gets you going. That's
it. Get going. Because I'm with you. The problem with your website is it's never done. It's never, no. You can always go, it would be cool if I could do this. And it's never, your website is rarely ever done. It's just like, it's good enough is usually as close as you're going to get.
Well, your show is the same way, right? I mean, think about how often you're tweaking. I mean, think School Podcasting, how you have changed the formats. About every 100 or so, it seems like you do you go through a re-evolution of some formats. You learn some stuff. You make it easier. You add some more. We go in these, we oscillate in these waves of I'm going to make it really complicated, and then that's just too much work. So I'm going to bring the production back to simple, and then I'm going to get complicated, right? Adding these things in. So Jason had said in the chat room, you were talking about doing the radio shows, and he said you have to be careful, and I think this is true. Some of those radio stations will not let you air what you did air on their program as a podcast. Although, then see it as practice. Go into the radio station, do it as practice. Dave, you do this. You practice on us here on Saturday mornings, and then you take the best of it oftentimes and put it on School Podcasting. And that doesn't hurt. In that case, you've gotten some negative feedback because you have the same listeners to both programs, right? Probably wouldn't be so much on the radio side, but it'd be good. It'd be good practice.
Yeah. Well, it's always interesting because I'll get an idea over here, and then I'll dig deeper between Saturday and Sunday night and I try to come up with either additional points or a more succinct idea of what the heck I was trying to say on Saturday, where it was just spilling out of my face,
Well, no one has to deal with it more than me because I'm here with you on Saturday mornings. We've talked about it in the pre-show. Then we've talked about it in the show, maybe even a little bit post-show analysis. Then I listen to it again on Monday mornings when you've got it out on School Podcasting. So it's an all Dave Jackson weekend for me.
It's a whole lot of Dave. We did have one question. I think this was from Megan. She says, I am recording a Skype call later. 2 hosts of a podcast sitting in the same room using a Behringer Xenix 1204 mixer and connecting to a guest via a Skype call recorder. How do I set up my location to record 2 separate XLR mics to the same Skype call? I've tried just having 3 separate Skype lines, but for some reason we get crazy feedback. That could be if you're in the same room. What's happening is if Jim was in the room with me and he said something, it went over Skype and then came back to me. You get this, I would hear him in the room with me and then on a 10 millisecond delay or something like that. So I've tried just having 3 separate Skype lines. Okay, we get crazy feedback. Then if I go into separate office, my co-host can't be on the good XLR because it won't reach. This has been plaguing me for once. Our workaround is just sharing one mic. No, that's not good. Unless you're not Steve Perry. The lead singer of Aerosmith, Steven Tyler and Joe Perry. There we go. Put them together, you get Steve Perry, but that's the guy from Journey, who share a mic because it's very rock and roll.
Yeah.
But there's got to be a better way. Yeah, it's called a mixer. This is one of the reasons that you get a mixer. When you have 2 people in the same room with you, or you're going to mix in some sort of, fun-filled music live, you need a mixer for that. So that would be, so you could have both of you. And when you're in the same room, don't sit side by side, sit across from each other so that your microphones are pointing away from each other. There's almost no way you can avoid getting what they call bleed, which is basically where your co-host is going to sound a little bit in your microphone and vice versa. So do what you can and live with the results. But that way, you two, and this is why the mixer, you want to make sure you're both the same volume level, and then that will go to Skype, and then your guest will come into your mixer as well, and then you can take the mix of you, your co-host, and the Skype caller, and run that into either another computer where you're recording it, or yes, a portable recorder. That make sure you know how to run and make sure your SD card.
You're gonna think of me now every time you say that, aren't you? That was my real goal, is just to get in your head about voice recorders. You know, at work, Dave, I get this question all the time because we will do multiple guests, and when I put them in different rooms, they always ask me that question, like, "Oh, shouldn't we be in the same room?" Like I thought, and I'm like, no, actually, with a single mic and not using a mixer, it's a lot easier if I really separate everybody out and have them, or they can't hear themselves. And in some cases, I've had them even next door to each other, and it's weird because they're hearing, because of the delay, they're hearing the person in the other room, and then they're hearing it in their ears a little bit later. So I really try to separate them out. I have found that's the best experience, to get the cleanest, best audio from the customer, where they're not freaking out because they're hearing things twice or whatever. Just get them as far apart from each other, even if we're in the same building. Get them in separate rooms that are isolated, and that's what's worked best for me. And it makes it easier when you're using those USB mics. Not always possible, but that's what's worked best for me.
Kim asks in the chat room, she says, has anyone found a good WordPress plugin that lists books? I knew one about 10 years ago, and the problem is that's such a niche little kind of plugin that it doesn't. The one I liked, I think, went out of business. The person that was doing it, things like that. Are we
talking like from Amazon, or what are we? Because wouldn't Amazon have a widget if you were gonna send them? You could build a custom widget on Amazon and put on your site. I'm not assuming you always want to sell this on Amazon, but that was just one of my thoughts.
There you can make an A store. Kind of handy. If you go to, hold on, I will get you. Go to bestpodcastinggear.com and click on the shop button at the top. That is my embedded A store. So that has over to the chat room. It's not the prettiest thing in the world. The Amazon A store.
What's the name of that site, Dave? Best Podcasting?
Bestpodcastinggear.com/shop. And in this case, instead of having a button there that you then click and go to Amazon, I've got Amazon embedded into my website. And so, you can have them, you make categories, and then you go over and you search for a item, and then you say, yes, add this to my store. It's kind of cool and kind of a pain in the butt. If I go over, I'm going to guess, where was the one I was at? Yes, if over there's a category for USB interfaces, and I just discovered that the Zoom U24, which is a 2-in-1 4-out handy audio interface, it's a USB interface, is currently not available. And so there'll be times, I know for a while I was recommending a mic stand that was, I'm trying to see it in I think it was specifically made for Amazon. I can't see it, but it's here, it's one of these, where you basically, he said breaking his back. It's one of these, right? It's got this, like, I'm going to take you out. In fact, I need to keep this in my bedroom. It dawned on me the other day that if a burglar ever broke into my apartment, the only thing I could do was like throw an Amazon dot at his head. This would take somebody out. It's got this big heavy thing, and then it's got a boom arm. So if I put it on the desk, I wouldn't have to scouch over to talk into it. And a company made one of these. I can't remember the name. It doesn't matter because they're not there anymore. It was like $15. And I was like, are you kidding me? So now the cheapest one I found is from a company called OnStage, and now they're $26. But this just like, all of a sudden it was like, it was in my store, and all of a sudden I went over one day and I noticed that there was no price underneath of it. And I click on it, it's like, yeah, not available. And I'm like, not available, like not coming back kind of thing. And it's still not available. So,
well, it just means you have to, you got to shop your own store from time to time just to make sure everything is still, because that's going to happen. Things are going to go out of, they're going to go out of print, so Kim, maybe maybe building a custom store like this with the books in there, Dave, I'm sure it gives you the chance to, like you put best podcasting gear - school of podcasting. And then you chose some things, some bundled things to show right in that widget on the page there.
Well, there's the store,
Right.
and then if you go to bestpodcastinggear.com at the top, there's a link to podcasting kits, and that takes you to a website called, I believe it's just kits.com or kit.com. I can't remember which. And this allows you to bundle Amazon products together. And then what you do is you grab your link with your affiliate link in it, and it basically bundles them so you can actually click on those. And I wish it was a little more intuitive, but there's a little button at the top that says buy all on Amazon. And it basically takes all those items with your affiliate links, puts them into a cart on Amazon, and they can check out and yada, yada, yada. And I kind of asked them, I'm like, what's in this for you? And they said, because on occasion, somebody will not put their affiliate link in and they will use theirs. And I'm like, that's kind of an odd business model. You're hoping your customer messes up. But at this point, it's working. It's kind of, it's an interesting site to say the least. Kit.com, no S. So I have both those over there. So, cause I get that on occasion. Somebody like, well, it's just going to be me. Then I'd be like, are you doing Skype interviews? Nope, just me talking into a computer. And I'm like, all right, go over, click on the solo podcaster. Do you want a desk stand? And I need to make a couple more variations of this, because if you want a desk stand, I've got the one with the arm that you can pull in and out. Some people don't want to have that permanently stuck on their desk, even though it's not technically permanent, that kind of thing. And, are you and your co-host in the same room or not? So I've got different variations of that, as opposed to giving them a laundry list. I can say, no, go buy this kit. And then in most cases that will fit most people. So just some fun ways to play with Amazon.
Well, Amazon's got some interesting tools. I mean, if you're an affiliate and you haven't gone out to their, to the affiliate page and looked under the banner section or look under I forget if they call it custom or whatever, but they do have some interesting things you can do to put different banners and different links and kind of try to make it look attractive. There's really no way to make it, advertising always be the most attractive thing in the world, but you can kind of make it attractive. So if you haven't done that, it might be worth taking a look and reviewing that.
And I believe they have a kind of like a CP, almost like Google AdWords, where you can put a code on there. And it's kind of freaky. They try to read your website to see what content is on there and then try to feed ads that are relevant to what's on your website.
Yeah, I did one of their bounty. They have some Audible things like that. And I threw that in a newsletter one time. And I thought, I know none of my listeners will ever click on this. Apparently they did. So, you never really know.
Yeah, I'm amazed. I don't talk much about Audible on any of my shows, although I will be on the School of Podcasting, because I'm not going to steal my own thunder. I listened to a phenomenal book that I will be talking about on Monday's show. But it's one of those things where I still probably one a month, $15 every time somebody signs up at Audible. So if you want to sign up for the Audible trial, you can go to schoolofpodcasting.com/audible. I don't know what the criteria is. I remember Bill Conrad.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Mr. One More Question.
Yeah.
He's I don't know. Last I heard, I think he's through the academy. I know he went back to be a cop.
Doing real estate for a while, wasn't he? And some politics stuff.
Yeah. Great guy.
Yeah.
And he was the only person I know of that he had just started his podcast. It was like on episode 2, and they actually turned him down, like Audible did.
Oh.
It was either Audible or Amazon. I'm trying to remember which one. Because I remember thinking I've never heard of anybody, but he wasn't getting any website. It was brand new. It was like on episode 2. So he didn't really have a whole lot of traffic, didn't have a whole lot of downloads. And they were like, no. And I was like, I've never heard anybody. So if you,
apparently it can happen.
Yeah. So if for some reason you go over there to sign up and they turn you down, don't,
sorry,
try back in 6 months.
I got an interesting bounty from Amazon for U.S. textbooks. So if one of your customers or one of your listeners trades in a textbook at Amazon, because they will buy them back, right? Amazon has a textbook buyback. they'll pay you on the buyback as well as the sale. So it wasn't much. It was 43 cents, but I had no idea. It was one of those kinds of things. I didn't know that existed, but interesting.
It's interesting that Amazon's getting into that game.
Well, it'd be a great game to get into. I mean, the mafia runs textbooks in the United States. So if you want to talk about a money laundering scheme and that's going on when we think about textbooks, that's what is here in the United States. But there is big money in textbooks. So are my daughters going to college this year? They're trying to break the back of the textbook industry. And it's $6 a class, flat fee. Your books, $6. No matter what class, what you're doing. And then most of them are available online and, whatever, or they're doing something to make that available. But I thought that was pretty cool. They're really trying to make, she gets a laptop when she gets there. They're trying to make this for her about the learning experience and making it affordable. This is one of these schools where she's going where they really work hard to keep the cost down and make it affordable. You're not going to find rock climbing walls. You're not going to find free coffee and cafes. You're not going to find, free massages. They're not at this school. This is what
going to?
She's going to Northwest Missouri State.
And Craig says, wait, the mafia is running the textbooks in the U.S.?
Yes, they are. It's a money laundering scheme. It is for sure.
Well, I've been listening to that Disruption podcast. I think I mentioned it last week from Dell. And it makes me think about things that need disrupted. Obviously, healthcare needs disrupted in the U.S. It's a mess.
Totally.
And then the other one is college. I'm waiting for somebody to come along, kind of like that, and just say, no. And because that was, to me, half the time my books were
it's ridiculous.
It's like,
it's
and then
ridiculous.
You go back and they give you a peanut.
It's a $200 book. Like it's this thick. Like it's $200. And then you're right. You sell it back. It's 10. You're like, I didn't even take it out of the wrapper.
Yeah.
And so it's ridiculous. The markup. And I mean, it's a crime. It is just a crime what they do with textbooks.
Do they offer a bookmark that you can reuse? Or a bookmark you can't refuse?
Yeah, that's right.
Bookmark you can't refuse.
Well, I mean, and this is not podcasting. I get all fired up about this. One of the, I recruit on college campuses all around the United States all the time. In some of the prestigious schools that I go to, there's 6 or 7 buildings being built at a time, Dave. Not like one every 5 or 6 years. We're talking 5 or 6 at a time. And I'm just thinking, when this bubble bursts and the students figure out like, hey, I'm just going to start going to a cheaper school because I don't want $150,000 in debt when I get out, right? And I don't care as a parent how much you've saved. You're not paying it. It's ridiculous. It'll be interesting when students figure that out. There's going to be a huge crisis, and schools are going to start defaulting on these buildings because they have huge payments that they got to make on. It's not free to build buildings. So anyway, sorry to go off on that.
Well, it's funny you say that. I did a talk this week for small business owners at Kent State Stark campus. And I went to school across the parking lot at a place called Stark State. And it was interesting going back because when I was there, it was one building. And now it's like a block and a half. It's amazing.
Oh, it's crazy what they're doing.
The Kent State place, I felt like I was in the United Nations. It was this whole tiered thing, and I was at the bottom, this big, huge screen. It was awesome. And it's interesting. Maybe we'll talk about this in post-show. I am like at times, the worst advocate for podcasting because I tell the truth. And they were all like, oh, this sounds great. Oh, awesome. But then we get to them like, oh, yeah, by the way, 4-to-1 is my rule. So if you want to do a 15-minute podcast, it's going to take you an hour. And they all went, you could just see them going, oh, you could see them going, wait a minute, if I'm doing 8 hours of work. So that was kind of fun. I was like, maybe I shouldn't mention that anymore. I should let them find it out on their own. But and then I brought up their numbers. I actually got a lot of really good feedback. Kim was there, which was cool. And but Jim, what's coming up on the AverageGuy.tv?
Well, we just had a super fun interview with the Veronica Belmont, which was great. She is dynamite, by the way. You've probably seen her in some Techzilla and some other tech podcasts around there. She did a great job. We talked about bots. So if you're interested in the kind of the bot conversation, and it's not a super technical, nerdy conversation, by the way, this is kind of bots for the average guy. I just posted that a few minutes ago before the show started, theaverageguy.tv.
Nice. I haven't figured out what I'm talking about on Monday. It will either be improv for podcasters or B, lessons I learned from Kevin Hart's book called Life Lessons. You Can't Make This Stuff Up. Phenomenal book. Everybody should read this book if you're in entertainment. It's just really, really cool. But thanks to the chat room. Stick around for some post show. We're here every Saturday at askthepodcastcoach.com/live. And